Good afternoon, good morning, good evening. Today I'd like to cover two items. The first one is Zimbabwe's President Emmerson Mnangagwa has gone ahead and officially opened Parliament. So this issue with Sadc, as far as ZANU-PF is concerned, is business as usual. We're still waiting to hear what Sadc has to say on the issue of their Sadc election observer mission report, which condemned the 23rd August election as a sham and the way of sham. But we'll have to wait to see what Sadc is going to do about it. The other interesting point to note here is that Nelson Chamisa and this group apparently boycotted the opening of Parliament. And this is becoming the norm in Zimbabwe. We always have Parliament and the opposition boycotting the opening of Parliament. It's becoming a tradition now. I think it should be noted here that the people of Zimbabwe have risked life and limb to elect MDC/CCC into Parliament on the understanding that the opposition would implement the necessary democratic changes to end the ZANU-PF dictatorship. After 23 years, 5 of which in the GNU, the opposition has not implemented even one meaningful democratic change. This boycotting of this opening of Parliament, elected CCC mayors announcing that they're going to forgo buying the mayor limousine, are just gimmicks. The real big issues the opposition have failed to do. They failed to implement the democratic reforms to stop ZANU-PF rigging the elections. What is more, the opposition have given up on reforms and free and fair elections. Indeed, they even boast of participating in these elections in the understanding that they will win rigged elections. This is where we are. We are now fighting to win rigged elections. In other words, they have accepted that ZANU-PF can rig the elections. And the best they can do is participate in those elections in the hope of winning rigged elections. The reality is, of course, as we saw last month, they've never failed to win rigged elections. Chamisa claimed that he had plugged all the vote rigging loopholes when it was abundantly clear that he had not. How can you say you've plugged all the vote rigging loopholes and you don't even have a verified voters roll? And you decide to participate without a verified voters roll? Absolutely ridiculous. But this is the reality that we are facing in Zimbabwe. This is the tragic reality that we have to put up with in Zimbabwe. I think the people of Zimbabwe have got to wake up to that reality that CCC is never going to implement any meaningful democratic changes and thus deliver free, fair, and credible elections. They will never do that. That is a reality that the people of Zimbabwe must now accept. And it is naive to think we can get away with it. So, as we wait for this decision from Sadc, if we do get it, I think this will be a timely reminder to the people of Zimbabwe that if we really want to have the democratic changes implemented and Zimbabwe finally moved from the chaotic state it is in now to a really healthy and functioning democracy, we need to appoint competent men and women who will implement the reforms. They're not interested in more and more gimmicks. And I believe that if we have this National Transition Authority, then CCC and ZANU-PF should not play any role in that administration. We have got to accept that ZANU-PF and CCC are responsible for the mess we are in right now. The two parties had the opportunity to implement the democratic reforms during the last GNU. They failed to implement even one. And to ask them or to expect them to implement reforms in the next one is being naive, to say the least. We need to move on. Zimbabwe cannot afford to drag its feet on this issue. We need to move on. So while we wait, we must know exactly what we want. While we wait for Sadc to make its decision, we must know exactly what we want. And what we want is a National Transition Authority that will implement the democratic reforms and allow Zimbabwe to move out of this mess. The second item I wanted to talk about today concerns a story of this gentleman, Baba Tencent, a Zimbabwean who is in South Africa. A few days ago, there was a video that was circulating. He had made a video in which he had claimed that ZANU-PF had won the election, and ZANU-PF Wuchi, it's honey, that CCC had lost those elections. Apparently, this has incensed the Zimbabweans in the diaspora. That for days after that, the comments denouncing him were ruthless, to say the least. I think this is a culture that must be stamped out, must be condemned in no uncertain terms. As much as we may not agree with him, we have got to accept that he has got the right to express his views openly without being harassed, intimidated, or any of that stuff. I am furious that he was being attacked. More so, when you look at those people who are ruthlessly attacking him, have themselves said nothing about the Triple C leaders who misled them. Nelson Chamisa claimed that he had plugged all the vote rigging holes in these elections. And yet we didn't even have something as basic as a verified voters roll. And those same people said nothing when it became clear that the elections were being rigged. This is a political culture that is stifling meaningful debate, that is failing to hold those in positions of power to account. And yet, it is absolutely ruthless in attacking an ordinary person whose views you can ignore. If you don't agree with him, just ignore them. But yet, they went to town about it. In this particular case, it turns out that they didn't stop there. They apparently grasped on the man to the South African authorities that his passport is expired and he had overstayed his visa. And so the man was arrested and is in the process of being deported, if he has not been deported already. That kind of ruthlessness cannot be allowed. We really cannot afford that kind of foolishness and intolerance. There are many South Africans, many Zimbabweans in South Africa, just as much as in any other part of the world, who have overstayed their visa, whose passport has expired, and so forth. It's up to the authorities to find them. If you're going to report them just because you don't agree with what they said is the most outrageous thing anyone can do. We really need to grow up as a nation. We need to open up our minds. Zimbabwe is a failed state because we have not had meaningful democratic discourse in the country. That is the reality that we've got to deal with. And this kind of vindictiveness in the name of political intolerance must be condemned. It is said that Voltaire, the French philosopher, said that I disapprove of what you say, but will defend to the death your right to say it. Embracing that, the importance of that ethos, of that mentality, is important. I think Zimbabwe will never have a healthy and functioning democracy until we embrace the right of everybody to have their views, to express their views openly. And in this particular case, to defend, to put failed. I mean, it's not as if we don't know that the opposition has failed the country. We know it. And yet we put them on a pedestal. We're even to ask them much less hold them to democratic account, is unacceptable. That is the most idiotic thing that we could possibly do. We are not going to dig ourselves out of this mess by propping up the very individuals we have let the nation down again and again and again. We are not going to get out of this mess as long as we've got that mentality of putting failed individuals on pedestals where they become like gods. They are not gods. They are just ordinary mortals, fallible like you and me. And it is the duty of every citizen to hold those in public office to democratic account. And in this particular case, it is the right of every citizen to express their views openly and freely. If the gentleman believed that ZANU-PF had won the elections, and he is totally wrong, all we need is to say so. But to be so vindictive as to report him to the authorities so that he can be deported, one only wonders if those people were to get back into power, what else will they do? Are we not going to find ourselves in exactly the same situation here if those people were to get into power? We are fighting to end the ZANU-PF dictatorship, and yet we are busy creating another one. Because as soon as these people get into power, we can be certain that they would want to do the same thing. So in concluding, I'd just like to play the video of the gentleman who found himself, well, on the wrong side, shall we say, of the vindictive Zimbabweans.
Say,
you don't qualify to rule Zimbabwe. ZANU-PF yakatowina, Mnangagwa vakawina, musatondere vakatwa president. OAU, Sadc vachaita sei? Chii chavangaita?
So muzimbabwe vanhu vasingatukwe vekuti ukavatuka unoundurwa nenyika yose, unoita kuatakwa. Ndiwinki D navachamisa. I am a national treasure. So zviri kunzi baba Tencent avo vekuripwa kugara vadhipotwa kujoni mushure mekunge varipoterwa nevanhu kuti vane overstay plus passport yavo yakaexpire muna 2019. Zvakonzeresa kuti baba Tencent vadhipotwe inyaya yekuti vakaita vhidhiyo vachituka vaNelson Chamisa neTriple C. Muvhidhiyo umu vaiti vaMnangagwa huchi uye vaiti izvoni vaNelson Chamisa havana kubirirwa vakadyiwa pamaelections vachikurudzira ED. So ameno kuti pamwe vaidawo kupiwa mota nema40,000 aingopiwawo vamwe ameno, but apa ndopavakairasa. ZANU haina kana kumbovacheuka kana kupindura, then mazimbo akavakutsanira achivatuka baba Tencent. Dzimare vazogadzira imwe vhidhiyo vakapfeka apologezi vachikumbira ruregerero. So zvisinei taiti pada nyaya yapera, but mazimbo nenyaya yeukasha hwekurwadziwa nemamiriro uye nematongerwo enyika navaMnangagwa vakabva vakwenyera baba Tencent kuti vasungwe.
Well, that is a sad story indeed. And I think it must be condemned in no uncertain terms. We need people to have an open mind. People must be able to express their views openly and freely without fear of being harassed or intimidated. We are fighting a dictatorship to end those very things. And yet here we are. Before we have even finished destroying the ZANU-PF dictatorship, we are doing exactly the same thing. I think that must be condemned in no uncertain terms. As much as I don't agree with what he said, he had the right to say it and be left alone. This culture in Zimbabwe must stop. Every time you criticize ZANU-PF, you are labeled a puppet of the West, unpatriotic. They've even passed a bill now to punish people like that. And if you criticize the opposition, you're labeled a CIO or worse. They don't even listen to what you have said. They don't even listen to the validity of what you have said. This is the kind of mental problem that some people have. They cannot have a meaningful debate on an issue without resorting to abusing other people, threatening them. This culture has got to stop. Zimbabwe, if it's going to get out of this mess and have a healthy and functioning democracy, we need to embrace freedom of expression. We need to respect that everyone has got the right to be heard. We cannot pretend that we want a democratic country, and yet we do not want to be held to democratic account. If we are talking of politics, we should be able to talk in a free manner, disagree, agree on the facts, and we can disagree on opinion and so forth. I think this problem is a serious problem, and I think people of Zimbabwe must seriously address it. The country is not going to go anywhere until we address it. I hope that what we have seen is the end of it, that this is not going to be a carry-on where Zimbabweans are hunting each other down because they're different. They've got different political views. This madness has got to stop. This idea that if you do not agree with me, you are against me, is ridiculous, particularly when it turns out that those holding such strong views are wrong. Zimbabwe is in this political mess because the MDC-A have failed to implement reforms. That is a historic fact. MDC-A have been participating in these flawed elections, knowing fully well that they're flawed. They've been doing it out of greed. They themselves admit it. And yet we pretend not to know it. I think we need to be smart enough to realize that the opposition is taking the ordinary Zimbabweans for a ride. And having a serious open debate is the first step in opening those eyes. Meanwhile, let's wait to see whether Sadc is going to stand up and condemn ZANU-PF's action. This regime, as far as I'm concerned, is illegitimate. Opening parliament is not going to make any difference. ZANU-PF can pretend that it's business as usual. It is not business as usual. The 2023 elections were flawed and illegal, and they failed to produce a legitimate government. As for CCC, I find their boycott a meaningless gesture. Even after Sadc had condemned the election as flawed, they were falling over each other to take their oath of office and take their seats on the gravy train. And now they want to pretend they are boycotting the opening of parliament because the regime is illegitimate. So the regime is illegitimate, but you as the opposition, MPs, senators, and councillors, they are legitimate. What a meaningless fuss. We need this regime to be condemned. We need a national transition authority. And CCC and ZANU-PF must not be involved in that. We need to move out of this mess. And I think the people of Zimbabwe deserve a government that is accountable to them. We need to move away from this mess of rigged elections and bad governance. And so we must stand firm and side with Sadc that the 2023 elections were a farce. This ZANU-PF regime is illegitimate. What President Mnangagwa has just done is absolutely no relevance. None. Totally irrelevant. So we've got to move on. We must stand firm and stand resolute and determined to maintain our position. We could still demand that Sadc refuse to grant this regime political legitimacy, and we move on to a national transition authority in which competent men and women who will implement the reforms are going to be appointed. That position must remain, and I think we must be clear that is what we want and we demand. So I think that is the number one issue that we must be looking out for. And so we'll give you an update. As soon as we get something on it, I'll definitely be commenting on it. Thank you very much for listening and have a nice day.